Hi everybody and welcome to today's Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Eidson, the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. And as we all know, it's a really exciting time to be in procurement, especially with the pace of technological change. And so today's podcast is part of a special sponsored series that's taking part over the last 2 weeks of January 2020, where we aim to shine a light on the emerging and growth companies who are changing the way that leading procurement teams are driving outcomes that truly align with corporate objectives. And so we're going to ask an entrepreneur from 8 different companies questions about what gap in the market their solution addresses, how they differentiate their technology, and what the tools look like in action. It's a great way for you to get to know those who are truly leading the way when it comes to the digitization of procurement. And so in today's podcast, I talked to Edmund Zagorin of BidOps, and I first asked Edmund to share BidOps' elevator pitch.
Yeah, happy to provide a short elevator pitch, and thanks again, Phil, for having us on. So BidOps is really a sourcing enablement platform aimed at driving savings by getting better quotes faster. We use a layer of artificial intelligence to forecast the outcome of a negotiation before it begins, and we use that forecast to actually recommend to suppliers what quotes are they should submit as competitive offers. We have Fortune 100 referenceable customers, users all around the globe, and our best areas to try BidOps out in are direct materials. So everything from chemicals, metals, MRO products, spare parts, components, and anything that would be useful for a manufacturing supply chain.
So how do you, in practice, go about forecasting an outcome? What data do you need to do that, and how can the suppliers be sure that the accuracy of that forecast?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that our forecasting works is it estimates a willingness to discount based on the competitiveness of the negotiation, the amount of money that's involved, and the prior relationship of the suppliers with the buying organization. That forecast then translates into a discount off of a historical price, and suppliers are recommended to submit a competitive price. This has 2 main benefits for the supplier. One, they don't waste time creating quotes that are just way outside of the ballpark or way outside of expectations. And 2 is that it's easy for them to create and submit a quote just from a mechanical process. So there's much less typing. There's much less, kind of going through a spreadsheet and figuring it out. They can do that all within the application. So all of our forecasts are made at the line item level rather than in aggregate.
Interesting. So that would be a line level, for example. So if we talk about a component that has multiple line items within that component bill of material, would the price be at the aggregate level of the single component, or would it even go down into this element of the price should be, or component should be this price, this raw material should be that price? Like, what's the level of granularity?
It really just depends on how the user designs the bid model. So if we have some users that break out their raw materials by quantity because they want to see whether or not there are, different discounts at different volumes. And if you do that, then our AI will forecast at the level of quantity. And if all you care about is just getting a market basket quoted by, a bunch of different suppliers, then that's the level that the forecast will be at.
So it's pretty configurable based on essentially the needs of the buyer themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, our perspective is that, the sourcing process should provide the information for all parties to move forward with a decision in a timely manner. And that the faster that it can do that, then the more sourcing processes you ultimately can run. And we've done a deep dive on this and found that kind of the main differentiator between peer class and world class sourcing organizations is their ability to respond to changes in the market by running more sourcing processes.
Yeah.
And so in markets with high volatility or where volatility is prone to increase due to events, having the ability to ramp up and ramp down sourcing productivity, just the number of sourcing processes that your team can run, is tremendously advantageous.
Yeah, I imagine this shortens the sourcing life cycle significantly.
Yeah, absolutely, because a huge kind of, time cost in the sourcing process is getting the attention and engagement of suppliers and then making sure that they have adequate information and time to prepare a competitive quote. And so giving people a starting point is a great way to shave time off the process. It's also a great way to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page about what expectations are in terms of pricing or competition.
Now, when you are making recommended prices back to the suppliers, where they should be coming in at as they respond to an RFP or an RFQ, does the same, for example, if you're in a bid situation where you have multiple providers, is the same price going to each one of them so they all kind of have an idea of where the market should be or needs to be? Or are there other variables that may factor in, when you're thinking about total cost, where that number may be different based on each supplier?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that it actually works in the application is that suppliers complete a short survey before being able to view the price recommendation. And as opposed to a post hoc evaluation by, kind of buyers, stakeholders, et cetera, we ask that buyers actually specify what matters to them up front. And then all of those price recommendations are actually value adjusted up front. So, for example, if a supplier, agrees to certain payment terms or certain Incoterms up front, or perhaps is not able to provide what's desired on those fronts, then the price recommendation is actually takes that into account. So it says, in order for you to not provide our desired shipping channel and still be competitive, you would need to price here.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. This is really interesting to hear because, it's those things take a lot of time to discover what those price points can be. And sometimes you never get there, do you? It's kind of guesswork. And when folks ask you, I know personally, having been a buyer in the automotive space, you never truly know where the market is. You may think you know where the market is, and you may know where some of the input cost markets are, but you're never really sure if the price that you're getting is the most competitive or the best value for money. And this is something that, really helps you get to that point faster.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the other point to be made is that, a lot of times when negotiators refer to the market, they're really referring to an abstraction. Mm-hmm. The market is a hypothetical, series of options that may exist.
Yes.
And appealing to the abstraction of the market is a great way to, appeal to data, logic, reason, which all fundamentally are a way of gaining leverage in a negotiation context. But, the market in reality is the local options that you have, the suppliers who you can actually buy from, because those are that's your optionality. And to the extent that, your market is who you're getting quotes from, it's much more important to influence that at the local level than it is to kind of understand what options may exist to other people who aren't you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Often markets are micro markets that are contextualized for your very specific situation that may not even be relevant for anybody else. And so assuming that you can hit a number or an outcome that is broader, as often leads to disappointment, let's say, within procurement and savings numbers within procurement, because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily relevant.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, I think one thing that, we've all noticed over the past 10 years is that, there are distortions in most market prices day in and day out that are caused by very large entities engaging in some type of hedging strategy, engaging in, a financialization of certain commodity futures or financialization of, particular raw materials or even logistics lanes that might not have anything to do with actual market demand for, a particular, good or service. And so I think that while market data is important, I think you have to take that data with a grain of salt as well, because it, again, is not representative of true optionality.
So where was the inspiration to start BidOps? Where did it come from? What frustrations were you seeing or feeling personally where you saw there was a gap to address?
Yeah, me and my co-founders had been working with a variety of sourcing platforms, and we saw kind of three key frustrations that were kind of in common with all of them. One was that we were still sending a lot of spreadsheets by email, even alongside using these other sourcing platforms, and so we wanted to create something that captured all of the communication in one single source of truth and could integrate with email. So that was kind of a big, from a functionality perspective, something that we knew needed to change. Second is that we perceived that although some of the platforms out there could capture, all of the different sourcing processes, in many cases they were so complex and so configurable and so challenging to use correctly that we wanted a platform that actually just baked in best practices. Instead of giving people 10,000 options, giving people 2 or 3 really optimized options that would more or less, once set up, run by themselves and then be super repeatable. So if you had a good experience and you wanted to clone it and use it again or share it with someone else, it was very, very easy to do that. And then the kind of third big frustration / inspiration point was just this idea that when you give people a default outcome that is more or less what you want, you often get a better result. And so really just baking in the idea of kind of two-sided coaching into a negotiation process. And it's like, if we think about what makes relationships good, and I'm not just talking about supplier relationships, personal relationships, professional relationships, romantic relationships, it's clear communication. It's, both sides have a pretty good sense of the expectations of the relationship. That there's a pretty well-defined process for resolving divergences in those expectations. And if we look at the classic RFQ process, there's a lot of room for things to just go off the rails. And so that was really where we kind of got the idea of doing this. And this is not a new idea, by the way. Target price negotiations and anchor price negotiations have been around for a long time. But we wanted to create a negotiation engine that could automate those, particularly because we saw them just providing a foundation for better, faster supply chain relationships.
Yeah, and I think it's actually important to take the emotion out of those as well, which is one of the things that you do, because in the categories of spend that you talked about in the direct world and in the MRO, oftentimes those negotiations are very, there's often not a lot of trust in those negotiations, and they're very win-lose. And so I say win-lose, not necessarily meaning there's a winner and a loser, but one side will perceive that they won that negotiation and another side may perceive that they lost the negotiation without necessarily having the true facts at hand. So by doing what you're doing is you're kind of taking that out of it and making it a very fact-based negotiation instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that's crucial, and this is something that just from a game theory perspective, I think goes unacknowledged in a lot of procurement contexts, is that one of the most important factors in how kind of fair and reasonable a negotiation is going to end up is how long the negotiation is going to last. Mm-hmm. And negotiations that last longer almost always disadvantage the supplier. And so, what we've seen is that if you lower the transaction cost, the amount of time that a supplier has to engage in order to get a deal done, then oftentimes it actually makes financial sense for the supplier to offer a discount.
Right.
Because it's just you're paying less time for salespeople to manage that transaction. They can close more business, and in return, the buyer gets a better price, and the supplier gets to spend much less time executing the transaction.
Yeah, you're lowering their cost to serve. I'm a really big proponent of that. That so many of the costs that ultimately get baked back into a price to us are created by ourselves. That everything we do has a cost because it has the cost on the supplier. And as much as we can reduce that, then ultimately we'll see the benefit.
Well, and I think if you took a poll of, 10 account managers, or 10 salespeople, and asked them if, they would trade, 50% of the time on a deal for, 3%, 5% discount, you'd get, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think so.
That's a deal you do all week, twice on Sunday. So.
Yeah. Well, Edmund, I really appreciate your time. I got one last question. If listeners would like to know a little bit more about what you do at BidOps and how you can help them, what's the best place for them to go to find out more?
So our website is bidops.com, and there are, I would say, 3 ways that that listeners can engage. Number one is we actually just launched a free version of our product that anyone with a business email address can sign up, get in. The free version of the product doesn't have any AI in it. It doesn't have this value-adjusted price recommendations, but it's a great way to get a sense of the feel of the product. You can request a quote. You can add suppliers. You can collaborate with your team. And a lot of what we believe is that what's going to change the game in sourcing is just user-friendly software. And so we encourage people to, give it a try, kick the tires, kind of use it as a sandbox. The second way is just to, on our website, you can sign up to chat with one of us. We're pretty friendly and we don't bite. So if you want to talk to one of us directly, you can sign up there. And then the third way is that we do regular webinars that are an opportunity for some of our customers as well as just other luminaries in the sourcing and procurement world to share best practices. And those are always a good time. So check out a webinar if you're interested. Okay,
well, what I'll do, Edmund, is I'm going to include links to all of those in the show notes that will accompany today's podcast. For listeners, those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. And then either look out for the Startup Series, or you can search Startup Series or search BidOps as well. Either way will take you straight to the show notes for today's episode and the links that Edmund talked about. So Edmund, one last time, I just want to thank you so much for your time today and for joining me on the pod.
Thanks, Phil. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into this special Startup Series on the Art of Procurement. To listen to the entire series and for the show notes pages that accompany each episode, please go to artofprocurement.com/startup series.